This Jacksonville Bicentennial quilt was created by the Jacksonville Museum Quilters in 1976 to celebrate the country's bicentennial and to highlight the beauty and historic importance of Jacksonville. Anne and Bruce Butte designed the 20 squares. Several women created the blocks under the direction of Sue Grunwalds and Doris Scheidecker. The quilt squares are represented in this video as a rough chronology of Jacksonville's history. Many of the slides include links to more detailed histories. Helen Hine made this block of the Table Rock Saloon. It depicts the miner and burro representing the discovery of gold in 1851. This saloon included the first billiard table to be shipped to the West Coast, and it had a collection of relics and curiosities valued from $25,000 to $50,000. In its day, even government meetings were held in the saloon. Doris Scheidecker created this exceptionally detailed block commemorating Peter Britt, Jacksonville's renowned photographer, horticulturist, and vintner. The Methodist Church by Myrtle Clark and Helen Webb. The Methodist Church in Jacksonville is the oldest church south of the Willamette Valley, built on property donated by James Cluggage and James Poole. Not only Methodists, but Baptists, Presbyterians, and itinerant preachers held services in the church in its earliest years. Sue Grunwalds created the St. Joseph's Catholic Church block. Work began on the church in 1859. Archbishop Norbert Blanchett arranged for the church and offered Mass there in 1860. His nephew, Francois Xavier Blanchett, arrived in 1863. At his request, nuns from Montreal came and opened St. Mary's Academy in 1865. Father Blanchett and the nuns were also recognized for their services during the 1869 smallpox epidemic, which caused the deaths of 40 or more people in Jacksonville. The First Presbyterian Church by Doris Scheidecker. This church has been continually used since it was built in 1881. Its stained glass windows came from Italy via Cape Horn. Edna Meadows created the Dr. J. W. Macaulay House block. She also owned and restored the home. John Macaulay and his wife Jane, whose son James Cluggage Macaulay was born in Jacksonville in 1852, built this home. Then John deserted his family and left debts behind. Jane opened a school, ran the home as a boarding house, baked food for miners, and taught piano to support herself and her 3 children. When she died in 1899, her obituary described her as, quote, a leader in the best literary and social circles in Southern Oregon for over 40 years. Esther Hinger and Dorothy Scheidecker created the John Love House block. According to the quilt's notes, this is the oldest documented house in town and was built around a log cabin. Tragedies surrounded this home. John Love died at 37. His wife, Anne Sophia, lost her father when he was killed by Indians. Then she died of smallpox in 1869. Their children were raised by Mary Ann Harris Chambers, Anne's mother. John and Anne's daughter, Mary Harris Love, married John Hanley. They both died young, too. Their 3 daughters then lived with Hanley family members, and as adults, they shared Hanley Farm. Mabel Schultz made the Collars Law Office quilt square. The date is confusing because Jacksonville's Cultural Survey dates construction of this building to 1886. Actually, the quilt has multiple similar discrepancies. Charles Wesley Collar did have a previous wood building on the site. He was the son of prominent pioneers William and Georgiana Collar. Doris Scheidecker also made the Jacksonville City Hall block. The first brick building in Jacksonville was built on this site in 1854 as the Mari and David Dry Goods Store. That building burned in 1874 and was refurbished as City Hall in 1881. The current building includes some of the original bricks. Sue Grunwalds created the John Bilger House block. Bilger was a hardware merchant. The house was built of local brick in 1863. John and Amanda raised 8 children, and in 1868, Bilger was, quote, the wealthiest resident of Jacksonville. After his death in 1877, Amanda continued to run the hardware store. The Dowell House by Mabel Schultz. Dowell was a Jacksonville resident in 1853 when townspeople hung Indians, including a child. Dowell tried but was unable to save the boy. Dowell owned the Oregon Sentinel from 1864 to 1878. He opposed slavery and supported Republican candidates, so perhaps he was not always popular in predominantly Democratic Jacksonville. His daughter, Anna, was his law partner for a time in the firm of B.F. Dowell and Daughter. Dowell moved to Portland in 1885 and died there in 1897. Bonnie Rathbun made the Judge Colvig House block. According to the Jacksonville Cultural Survey, it was Addie Colvig who purchased their house in 1887. At the time, the house was painted the original Jacksonville gold color used on so many early buildings. William Colvig and his wife Adelaide Birdsey were both children of pioneers. Their son Pinto became famous as the original Bozo the Clown. He was also a Disney animator and the voice of some Disney characters, including Goofy. Wilma Doogie created the Chris Keegan House block. This home is a sample of simple board and batten construction. It was built by Minnie Obenchain Lewis, probably in 1907. She sold the house to Chris Keegan and his wife in 1919. Keegan and Harry Louie operated the Keegan and Louie Saloon on California Street for many years. Judy Oskbo made the U.S. Hotel block. This building was built by brick mason George Holt for his wife, Madame Jean de Ribaume Langio Guilfoyle Holt. It is said that when President Rutherford B. Hayes visited Jacksonville and stayed at the newly finished hotel, he complained of bedbugs and the $15 per room charge. The property had been used for a boarding house and hotel since 1852. The previous hotel burned in a major fire in 1873. Prior to that, it had included a dance floor resting on steel springs and a skating rink. Vera Elmgren created this Minerva Armstrong House block. It's a fine example of salt block architecture. Minerva Armstrong, a pioneer widow, bought the house in 1890, and when she died in 1910, she was 81, and 9 of her 11 children outlived her. This was also the first home of Cornelius C. Beekman and his wife Julia Hoffman, and the birthplace of their 3 children. Viola Davis created the Beekman House block. Beekman was the most prominent and probably wealthiest man in Jacksonville. He also served as mayor of Jacksonville, Republican candidate for governor of Oregon, which he lost by only 49 votes, Grand Master of the Masonic Lodge, and regent of the University of Oregon. The home, owned and occupied by only the Beekman family and still completely furnished with family artifacts, is preserved as a museum and periodically open to the public for special tours. The Jackson County Courthouse block, created by Helen Webb. Just 1 year before the Oregon and California Railroad bypassed Jacksonville, the county built its courthouse there. The famous D'Autremont trial occurred in this courthouse in 1927, just before all county business moved to Medford. From 1950 to 2010, the Southern Oregon Historical Society, which was founded to save the building, operated the Jacksonville Museum there. It is now owned by the City of Jacksonville and functions as its City Hall. Barbara Stathos created the Jeremiah Noonan House block. Noonan purchased plans for this home from George Frank Barber's catalog, The Cottage Souvenir. Although some stories say materials for the home down to its furnishings came by rail, others recount local contractors. Stories also abound about a family curse, lead poisoning, and ghosts. Marie Nicholson and Ida Clearwater created the Rogue River Valley Depot Block. The Medford and Jackson Railway Company formed in January 1890, and the first train arrived in Jacksonville in January of 1891. Although the railway changed hands multiple times, William Barnum and his family primarily operated the Rogue River Valley Railway for years. The tracks were removed in 1928. K. Clark created the Jacksonville Cemetery Block. This cemetery was established in 1860, but includes graves for pioneers who died as early as 1852. It is one of the oldest cemeteries in the Pacific Northwest and one of only a few that remain in use. A walk through the cemetery today reveals the names of so many pioneers, including Britt, Beekman, and Macaulay. We hope you'll visit Jacksonville.